G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds you all well. Today we're going to look at a few of the options for adjusting color and tone within Adobe Camera Raw, keeping in mind that there are, amongst all of the editing tools available across the Adobe suite, infinite number of tools available to make adjustments to our images. These are just some of the tools that I use as my normal workflow within Adobe Camera Raw, and I find them to be really quick, efficient, and help me to achieve the look that I'm looking for with my images. Now, of course, my edits are very different, whether it's travel images or for client work or corporate work. In these examples, we're using two images that I photographed in Kathmandu, Nepal, and they're going to be a great example to demonstrate some of those tools. All right, so the first image, which is of Bodhanath Temple, we're just going to have a look at firstly raising the exposure a little bit, just increasing that brightness because the image was quite dark if we look at the original one. Just raising that exposure, increasing that contrast. I always use a fairly flat profile with my raw images just so that I'm able to capture as much of the highlights and the shadow detail as possible without clipping. And you can see that most of that data is there in the histogram above. If we turn on that highlight clipping warning, we can see that it's just in a few of the areas that I would consider to be less critical. But if we drop those highlights down, you can see that we actually regain much of that detail. Now, not all of that detail. If we look in those lights over there, you can see we've pretty much lost everything. But certainly enough detail where the detail matters within the image. All right, let's just, look at that contrast. That works well. We're just going to raise the shadow ever so slightly, not a great deal. It's not a common tool that I use, raising shadow detail, because I find that the tonal values based on the edits I'm showing tend to yield the results that I'm looking for. But in this case, we're just going to raise them a little bit. Color, we're just going to increase our vibrance a little bit, up to the usual around plus 30 that I generally add. And for these sort of images, I'll usually add around plus 10 in the saturation as well. And I find that works really well. Excellent. All right. Let's look at the color temperature and tint as well. Now, you can see that there's some really different color sources on this image. I'm just going to turn off that highlight alert. You can see that we've got quite cool lighting up the top there because it's obviously illuminated just by the setting sun. This is at dusk. There's no sun hitting the ground anymore, but there's still natural light that's around there. And that's quite cool in comparison to the quite warm lights that we see around from the buildings and the city around the base of the temple. So you can see there's quite a transition of cool light through to warm light. Now for me, I'm not actually going to try and correct that so that it's neutral. I actually really like that there's a diverse sort of source of lighting in this image, and obviously it would look very different if it was shot during the day, but I think it works really well for this particular image. That works pretty well. All right, now we're just going to add in some detail, a little bit of sharpening and masking. We'll just hold down our Alt key so we can mask that sharpening. Now, this image was only shot at ISO 50, so I'm not going to worry about any noise reduction. There's really not a great deal of noise there. You can see it was quite a long exposure based on the movement of those prayer flags. Not going to worry about noise reduction. It's pretty clean on the scale of things. Certainly in terms of color and tone, I'm pretty happy with those adjustments. So just using under the light tab, the exposure, contrast, highlight and shadow sliders, and then under color we're using the temperature, tint, vibrance and saturation sliders. So these are the two panels that I generally use the most within Adobe Camera Raw, and I find they work really well. Now this image, for example, again, this image is straight out of camera as it was shot. I'm going to take a slightly different approach. So you can see that there's almost a soft, mystical nature of the image, and we're looking directly into that sun, just peering over the top of those temples and buildings there. And if we try to drop the exposure and the highlights, bring up the shadows, you can see that we're still not really gaining any detail in that highlight area, but there's quite a strong transition to where we are getting detail in the sky there. So what we're going to do, we're just going to reset that, and we're going to reset that as well, and we're going to head down a curve. So this is the second technique that I normally use for adjusting tone. And curves is something that I've used from the very earliest days of me using Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. And curves are a great way to adjust the highlight, which tend to be on the right upper side of the curves here, and the shadows, which are on the left lower side of this tone curve. You can see I've just double clicked there and it's removed those control points. So if you do put in a control point, you think, actually, I'm going to remove that. If you just double click over the control point, it goes back to normal or removes the control point that you've double clicked on. All right, so for this image, I actually want to bring down and reduce. Now, I'm not going to retain any detail or get back any detail in the sky, but I just want to add a little bit of tone there. And basically what I'm going to do is click and drag this far upper right hand corner control point. Now I'm going to take it to the extreme level just so you can see what I mean. You can see that it's dropped down the value there, but it's not regaining or retaining any detail that was originally there in the sky. And what happens in that situation is that it goes quite grey and muddy looking, which we don't want, but I just wanted to show you that example. So what I'm going to do is just bring that down a little bit and just drop the highlights a little bit and raise the shadows. And you can see what I've done is I now have a little bit more detail in that sky, and the transition from bright over to where the sky does retain detail is a far smoother transition. So you can see if we just zoom in a little bit, sorry about that. If we just zoom in a little bit and cross over from that high brightness area to that toned area of the sky, you can see it's a far more natural transition. And personally, I think that works really well. So just dropping that top right hand corner control point in your curves panel is a great way to be able to do that. I'm just going to make an adjustment to the color temperature as well. If you've ever been to Kathmandu, Nepal, you will know that early morning, late afternoon, you do get that beautiful warmth in the sun, and that's largely because Kathmandu Valley can be quite dusty and there's quite a bit of pollution, so you get that almost, I guess, mythical, mystic sort of look in the lighting, and it's quite soft lighting, even though there's no clouds in the sky, as this example shows. You can see that there's just that softness, that diffusion, for want of better words, in the lighting, and I think that works really well. So we're just going to add a little bit of warmth in there. We're just going to add a little bit of tint as well. There's a little bit of cyan there, not much, just +5 from where it started at -1. And that looks pretty good at this stage when just looking at the tone. We're going to add a little bit of contrast in just on the light panel, and a tiny bit of shadow and a tiny bit of highlight reduction. Again, I'm not going hard on that highlight reduction because we've really controlled the highlights, I think, better under that curves panel. But just dropping it a little bit more just to further refine that edit, I think works well. All right, let's have a look at the color panel. And again, we're going to increase that vibrance to +30. Saturation just a little bit. We're just going to go +5. We don't want to overdo it. I find when there's warm tones in images, the saturation, it's responsive to saturation far more than other colors within images. So because this is largely now a warm image, I don't want to boost that saturation too much. We want to keep it looking natural. So yeah, this is a fantastic part of Kathmandu, and one I really enjoy photographing on a regular basis when I visit. All right, let's have a look at that original image, and this is what I normally do with my edits, is that I'll come back to images. Sometimes over a period of time I might do edits, particularly travel images where I really want to make sure that I'm on the money with my edits. I'll just leave them for maybe a day or two, or I'll edit all the images and come back to the original one, which is what I've done here, just to make sure that I'm happy with the color tone. And for me, this is just a method of kind of auditing or resetting my eyes, and what I'm seeing, and making sure that I haven't pushed my edits too far. Even at this stage where I've been working in the photographic space for 25 years and editing digitally for much of that time, I still like to really check and make sure that I'm not pushing my edits into an unnatural look or space. So let's just go back to this one. I think we can actually warm that up just a little bit more. We're just going to raise the detail. I'm not worried that we've potentially lost detail in that sky, because to me the main subject matter is really here in the square. So obviously with that curve that we looked at earlier, I've just tried to bring it down just to bring it a little bit softer transition from the high brightness to the less high brightness in the sky. And I think that's worked well. But overall, the fact that there's really lost detail up here, I'm not too concerned about. This to me is where the story is, this middle part of the image. So I think that's really where people's focus will be. And, you know, if you were at that scene and you were looking into the sunlight with where it's positioned, then you probably wouldn't see a lot of detail with your eyes either. So overall, I think it works well. All right, so between those two images, I've used two different techniques for light. Certainly the color has been a consistent technique where I've used that color tab with temperature and tint. But with tonal curves, obviously this one I've used the light panel, and this one I've used a combination of the light panel, but mostly with the curves panel, and obviously I found that worked pretty well. Just want to acknowledge as well, this image has some terrible dust spots. It's an older image shot with a 5D Mark II. I think this was shot in 2012 or 2013, but certainly that would be something that I would normally take care of in Photoshop afterwards once I've opened the image in Photoshop. So just because I find the dust removal tools there, or the tools to deal with dust, a little bit better, I just prefer them in Photoshop to Adobe Camera Raw. All right. That's those two images edited. Pretty happy with the results. As I mentioned earlier, I would normally come back and just have a bit of a look at them just to make sure I'm happy with everything, but they look pretty good at this point. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you found this video helpful. As always, any questions are welcome in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.